I don't follow it, so I'm wildly out of date, you know.
Mick Jagger has spent a lifetime in noise. Not just the roar of stadiums or the pulse of records spun into history, but the constant chatter of rivalry, envy, and myth. For decades, he danced through it all with a grin sharp enough to cut, a voice sharp enough to wound.
Who are the greatest, the Stones or the Beatles?
I don't care.
No?
I think it's an irrelevant question.
The Stones were built on defiance. On stage, Jagger turned sneer into spectacle, every gesture a performance, every lyric a dare. Yet behind that bravado was a ruthless ear, tuned to rhythm, attitude, and truth. He did not just celebrate bands, he judged them. Some he admired, others he dismissed with the flick of a line. And then there were the few he openly despised, carving their names into his personal blacklist. Because for Jagger, rock was never neutral. It was a battlefield of rhythm, passion, and authenticity. Bands who missed that mark were not just competitors, they were betrayers of the spirit itself. He laughed, he sparred, he mocked. But when he named the ones he hated most, it was not cheap gossip. It was philosophy. Here are the 5 bands Mick Jagger could never forgive, and the reasons why. Number 1, The Doors. Jagger respected chaos, but only when it held rhythm. With The Doors, he saw indulgence masquerading as rebellion. Jim Morrison's Theatric struck him as overblown, a performance that drowned the song. To Jagger, rock was supposed to seduce and sting, not collapse under its own weight. For the Stones, chaos was always sculpted. It lived inside grooves, carried by Charlie Watts's steady pulse and Keith Richards's riffs, cut sharp enough to drive a crowd wild without losing control. The Doors, in Jagger's eyes, surrendered to excess. Their concerts often teetered on the edge of breakdown, Morrison spiraling into long rants and aimless improvisations that bled away tension rather than heightening it. Jagger believed audiences could forgive almost anything except boredom, and for him, the Doors crossed that line far too often. The split was philosophical. Jagger leaned on discipline masked as looseness, wild energy harnessed by structure. Morrison sought transcendence through abandon, dragging his band into moments that, for Jagger, felt indulgent rather than liberating. He once remarked that too many groups confused self-expression with performance, saying, "You can't just collapse on stage and call it art." That comment, though indirect, captured why the Doors irritated him. They aimed for myth, but Jagger saw the seams showing, music stretched too thin, performance overtaking pulse. He wanted songs that cut to the bone in 3 minutes, not endless sprawls that drowned momentum.
Yeah, all that, you know, which is just rubbish because I just don't, you know.
Even musically, the fit was uneasy. The Stones thrived on blues stripped to essence, riffs you could hum while walking home. The Doors layered organs, poetry, and improvisation in ways Jagger felt drifted into pretension. He believed rock had to stay raw and bodily, something people could move to, not just contemplate. If you can't make them dance, then you've missed the point, he once quipped. That was the measure: movement, pulse, drive. The Stones built it night after night. The Doors often sacrificed it in the name of spectacle. To Jagger, that betrayal of rhythm was unforgivable. Chaos without groove wasn't rebellion, it was collapse. And collapse was the one thing he could never respect, because without rhythm, even fire eventually burns out cold. Number 2, Led Zeppelin. The Stones and Zeppelin were titans of the same era, but rivals in spirit. Jagger bristled at Zeppelin's sprawling excess, the endless solos, the thunder built for spectacle. Where he prized groove and lean sharpness, he saw in Zeppelin a kind of overindulgence that threatened to turn rock into parody. The contrast was glaring. The Stones leaned into swing and restraint, crafting riffs that moved hips as much as they rattled speakers. Zeppelin leaned upward, higher, louder, longer, pushing every moment towards spectacle. Jagger often mocked bands that confused sheer volume with impact, once remarking that noise without rhythm is only noise. For Jagger, the problem was not ability. He admired Page's talent, Bonham's power, Plant's voice. It was the philosophy. Zeppelin embodied the shift from blues-driven rock toward arena mythology, where songs became launching pads for 10-minute solos and pageantry that swallowed the core. Jagger distrusted that kind of indulgence. He believed audiences craved release, not worship.
I mean, it's not that much, I'm not obsessed with it, let's put it like that.
The Stones could stretch, but even at their wildest, they returned to pulse. That discipline separated seduction from self-indulgence. Zeppelin, Jagger felt, crossed the line into theater, a kind of rock opera without the irony. To him, the thunder was impressive but impersonal, too polished in its chaos. Jagger once quipped that if you can't finish a song before the crowd drifts, you've already lost them. That attitude explained his distaste. Where Zeppelin's mythology grew on spectacle, the Stones built legend on stamina, grooves that lived inside people's bodies. The rivalry also carried an edge of envy and competition. Both bands conquered the 70s, but Jagger resented the notion that Zeppelin's bombast represented the peak of rock. He wanted history to remember the Stones as the true standard-bearers, the band that kept blues alive while others gilded it in excess. To Jagger, Zeppelin symbolized a dangerous drift, away from raw groove and into ornamental grandeur. He could respect the craft, even acknowledge the genius, but respect was different from love. Zeppelin may have been gods to millions, but to Mick Jagger, they were the cautionary tale. Proof that when spectacle swallows rhythm, rock stops moving forward and starts eating itself. Number 3, the Grateful Dead. If the Stones were fire, the Dead were driftwood. Jagger mocked their endless jams, calling them self-indulgent meandering. To him, music needed propulsion, something primal that carried an audience forward. The Dead, in his eyes, got lost in their haze and left the spirit of rock stranded behind them. The clash was almost elemental. The Rolling Stones built their legend on groove, that irresistible forward push of drums and riffs, songs that made hips move whether you wanted them to or not. The Grateful Dead, by contrast, chased an almost spiritual looseness. Their shows dissolved into 20-minute explorations that blurred melody, rhythm, and structure. To fans, that openness was freedom. To Jagger, it was drift. He once scoffed that if you don't give the audience a heartbeat, you may as well not bother being on stage. What frustrated him most was the loss of urgency. Jagger lived for the tightness of a groove, the crackle of tension between band and crowd. He believed that a rock concert should feel like a fuse being lit, not incense burning out slowly in the corner. The Dead, with their hypnotic wanderings, seemed to him like musicians playing for themselves while the audience merely observed. Jagger also distrusted what he saw as myth-making. The Dead were not just a band, they were a culture, a caravan of followers who prized the journey over the arrival. Jagger did not buy it. He had built his career on the opposite principle: rock as immediacy, impact, a shot of adrenaline that left no room for drift. He once remarked, half amused, half annoyed, that songs are meant to end before people start looking at their watches.
Whoa! I don't know.
Still, the critique was not only about style, it was about what the Dead represented. In Jagger's eyes, they blurred the line between performance and passivity, inspiring copycats who believed endless improvisation was enough to carry a crowd. He worried that this indulgence drained rock of its fire, stripping away the urgency that made the music dangerous in the first place. To him, the Dead embodied the opposite of everything the Stones stood for. Where he prized grit, they drifted into haze. Where he demanded focus, they offered endless delay. And so he dismissed them, not as rivals, but as a warning that without drive, rock music was not liberation. It was simply wandering without destination. Number 4, Queen. Jagger admired ambition, but Queen's theatricality crossed his line. Freddie Mercury's operatic heights impressed millions, yet Jagger dismissed the spectacle as gaudy. For him, rock did not need crowns or costumes, it needed danger. And Queen's polished flamboyance, to his eyes, turned rebellion into theater. The Stones had always weaponized simplicity. They carried menace in riffs stripped bare, in grooves that shook without decoration. Queen, on the other hand, constructed cathedrals of sound, complete with harmonies stacked like monuments, and live shows that felt closer to opera than to blues. For Jagger, who built his career on sweat, swing, and sexual provocation, that kind of excess felt like betrayal. He once remarked that rock and roll should be dirty enough to make you uncomfortable, not clean enough to take home to your parents. It was not that he denied Mercury's brilliance. Jagger respected charisma. He had built his life on it. But where his own stagecraft was raw and confrontational, Mercury's operatic flourishes seemed, to him, overly staged. Jagger believed rebellion had to feel dangerous, unpredictable, even a little unhinged. Queen's precision and theatrical design, however dazzling, struck him as closer to show business than to revolution. Philosophically, it was a clash of aesthetics. Queen represented the ascent of rock as grand theater, music as spectacle to be admired. The Stones held fast to the idea of rock as something you lived in your body first. Dirty grooves, imperfect but irresistible. Jagger feared that Queen's brand of grandeur encouraged younger bands to chase image before instinct, choreography before groove. He quipped once, with pointed irony, that if you spend more time rehearsing your costume changes than your rhythm section, you're not a rock band anymore. Behind that jab was a genuine concern. Jagger believed rock's power lay in its ability to strip away pretense, to connect primal energy with the crowd. Queen's layered arrangements, keys, and operatic arcs created awe, but Jagger felt they left little room for raw heat. To him, Queen were dazzling but too safe, rebellion dressed in sequins. And in Jagger's world, anything too safe had already lost the pulse of danger that gave rock its reason to exist. Number 5. ABBA. The Stones stood for grit. A BBA stood for gloss. Jagger sneered at their shimmering perfection, seeing it as the antithesis of rock's raw pulse. Their global triumph only sharpened his distaste. To him, pop that smooth was not liberation. It was surrender. The contrast could not have been starker. While the Stones leaned into imperfection, rasping vocals, ragged grooves, guitars that swaggered rather than shimmered, ABBA embraced polish with surgical precision. Every note was immaculate, every harmony crystalline. To Jagger, that sheen felt like sterility. Rock, in his mind, should sound like sweat and risk, not like it had been scrubbed clean in a studio. He once quipped, "Rock and roll isn't supposed to sparkle, it's supposed to bruise." It was not that he denied their talent. Jagger understood songwriting craft, and ABBA's hooks were undeniable. But to him, the very perfection of their songs was what stripped them of danger. He believed that pop, when polished too far, stopped moving people and started soothing them. That ran counter to everything the Stones built their identity on: confrontation, seduction, provocation. ABBA also represented, in Jagger's eyes, the mainstreamization of rebellion. Rock had begun as the outsider's voice, dangerous, even scandalous. By the late 70s, ABBA's worldwide dominance proved that pop could flatten those edges, turning music into something palatable for everyone. Jagger did not want palatable. He wanted something that could still shock a parent, still thrill a teenager, still feel like a line being crossed. He once remarked that the second your music feels safe in every living room, it's lost its teeth. The irony, of course, is that ABBA's influence was immense, shaping pop for generations. But that only deepened Jagger's disdain. He worried that their smoothness set a precedent, that future bands would chase perfection instead of pulse, image instead of instinct. For him, that was the ultimate betrayal of what rock promised at its birth. To Mick Jagger, ABBA symbolized surrender, music designed not to provoke but to please. And pleasing, in his book, was never enough. Rock had to unsettle, to seduce, to scrape its knuckles against the world. ABBA chose polish, Jagger chose grit, and that divide was irreconcilable. Mick Jagger's grudges were never small, they were statements. Each band he dismissed revealed not just rivalry, but philosophy. To him, music was survival, rhythm against chaos, grit against gloss, danger against safety. The Doors, Zeppelin, The Dead, Queen, a BBA, he rejected them not simply as peers, but as paths he refused to walk. It reminds us that rock history is not one straight line, but a battlefield of competing visions. Some chased freedom through excess, others through perfection. Jagger chose the groove, the pulse that could ignite a crowd in seconds and linger for decades. And maybe that is his true legacy. Not the stadiums filled, nor the records sold, but the belief that music should never play too safe. Because for Jagger, if it is not dangerous, it is not rock and roll. What about you? Which bands do you think Jagger would have spared or added? Share your thoughts below and subscribe for more journeys into music's fiercest conflicts.